What's up, guys? Welcome back to the Brute Podcast. It's Dex Hopkins, and my guest today, athlete fixer-upper, doctor of physical therapy, and sister to Matthew Eugene Torres, Nicole Torres. Welcome to the party.
Thanks for having me. Excited.
His middle name's definitely Eugene.
Do you know what
Has
it is?
to be. No, what is it?
It's Dan.
No.
Yes. So
Just Dan.
Just Dan, and it's actually after Dan Marino.
There's been worse. It's been worse. If it was after like Steely Dan, that'd be worse, I guess. Something like that. I didn't know. I thought you were gonna say something elaborate because I always mess with him and he looks. I was like, you look like you could be, you're like an exotic white. Like you don't look like a normal white dude. Like I'm very Anglo-Saxon, blonde hair, blue eyes. I was like, you could be a lot of things.
Yeah.
Matthew Dan.
Yes. And actually we're all kind of, and we have an older brother too, named Brian. And I say that like we all have very white names for our ethnicity, but anyway.
You live in Florida. Touche. That's so funny, dude. So if you guys don't know, we refer to Nicole for a million and one things as far as athletics go. She is a doctor of physical therapy and all those good things. So tell the fine people kind of like your athletic background and kind of the road that led you to wanting to be a physical therapist and all those things.
Yeah, I'll try to do the short version. But so my athletic background as being like young person in high school was actually in cheer, dance, and gymnastics. Not super high level gymnastics, but more gymnastics as it refers to cheer, so more tumbling. But this is my second career. So I started in advertising, and then in 2013 started doing CrossFit when Matt opened up his first affiliate. Like a lot of us that are here, drank the Kool-Aid, fell in love, went all in, started coaching, and then eventually decided to quit my job in 2015 to go back to school to be a PT. As I was coaching, I was always kind of like trying to figure out why people's like mobility sucked or why they got injured. And so I found myself really being passionate about this and stumbled across Kelly Starrett. So for like the OG CrossFitters, we know Kelly Starrett. And he's a physical therapist. And so I was like, oh, he's doing that. That's what I want to do. So that's what led me to go back to school, do all the things. Fast forward to now. Well, I'll say Matt and I have been working together since really 2013 on and off. I was the first coach that they hired at the gym. And then, after I stopped coaching, since I started working as a rehab professional, we've been working together with athletes since then. I also own a private practice in Naples, Florida, and then I work with athletes remotely. I still do CrossFit myself, and I have my level 3. Yeah, that's kind of like my very quick synopsis of CrossFit and PT and how I got here.
She's neck deep. A pivot into second career. How old were you when you started PT school?
30.
Let me out you real quick. That's awesome.
Yeah. So
I love a start over is not scary story.
For sure. It's not. From the get-go, I was very one track. I knew exactly what I was going to do. Out of school, I never worked for anyone else but myself. I started my business right out of school. I did have a short stint working for Active Life. So I worked for them for about 2.5, 3 years, which was really helpful to gain my knowledge as a remote rehab provider. And then really jumped into my own thing from there.
So talking like scope of practice wise, we say athletes, feel like that's a mega broad scope, because you obviously probably see like normal folk and things, people post surgery and all that stuff. But what like scope of practice wise from athletics, like is it like near and dear to your heart to always have CrossFit people, or is that just what falls in your lap, or kind of what kind of sports have we covered as far as like the higher level people?
Yeah.
So, the fun story. If Dan Marino came in there with a golf injury.
Yeah, for sure. Well, because we're in Naples, we have a wide variety of athletes here. My business is called The Resilient Athlete. So we kind of like CrossFit adopted this mentality of like, if you're an active person, you're an athlete. So definitely from people that are just, weekend warriors up to professional athletes. So in the CrossFit space, definitely like worked with games athletes and, down to everyday gym goers. I work with some like professional triathletes because Naples, we have a lot of like Ironman triathletes here. So really kind of the gamut of both. There's a lot of similarities in both populations, whether they're professional or not, that I see. I think it's more comes down to like the personality and the mindset so much, where that athlete falls in the spectrum. But definitely with CrossFit, that was like my first passion and love for like helping CrossFitters because as all of us, and we'll talk about injuries in CrossFit here in a second, but as all of us, we bump into things. And I have personally dealt with shoulder stuff on and off. And when I went to go to an orthopedic surgeon, because at this point I didn't really know much, luckily they did tell me go to physical therapy, but they also were like, well, you probably shouldn't be doing CrossFit. And That's where I kind of saw this gap in care for the fitness athlete, which is kind of like not someone in organized sports, but someone who is an individual athlete. And, 15 years ago, this wasn't really a thing, but now we're seeing fitness athletes. So whether it's CrossFit or High Rocks or boot camp, people that they're not going to play a sport necessarily, but they want to push their body. And there was no provider that understood that person. And so that's kind of where I fell in as a provider. And then personally, as an athlete myself, I was like, I want to work with athletes, but every time people think of physical therapist that works with athletes, it's like someone working with a professional sport, like a football team or a baseball team. We've kind of now moved into a space where we're working with this like fitness athlete is kind of what we call it in the rehab space that I'm in. Yeah.
No, I love that. And I think I've been in affiliates for 12 years, most of my adult life. And so while I have fought the same fight, just not to the extreme where you're like, you know what, I'm going to PT school. We're going to fix all these people. And so we can get sport specific into CrossFit because I love that as it is, my life. You said you're L3 coach, been in affiliates, all that stuff. And it's kind of branched you into like this whole new world. What are like common things you're seeing? It doesn't have to be regulated to like games athletes. I think it kind of covers across the board. Like you said, mom, dad, brother, sister, I want to be the fittest lawyer in my office or whatever, the fittest garbage man tossing these bins around. What are the things you're seeing people when they get into CrossFit, and it could be locally or in your telehealth thing? What are you seeing that kind of holds people back and like just like the bigger things?
Yeah. So personally, what I look at a list of things that I see as like most common injury reasons. And then when I evaluate someone, we're touching on all these points, right? So this would be a little bit of a longer section here, but I'm happy to go through those if you want me to do that.
No, go crazy. You got till, what'd you say you had a call at 11 or
Yeah,
12?
yeah.
You're good.
We got
Let's
time.
go
We got time.
crazy.
Yeah. So it kind of breaks down to a few things, right? And the obvious ones and the things that most people consider is like technique and position, right? This is probably the most common thing that people think is the reason for their injury. And it can certainly play a role, but I think people miss the mark on a lot of other things. So technique and position is going to be, we kind of know that technique and position aren't necessarily the same thing. Your position is going to determine your ability to perform technique. So, and then that's going to be determined by things like your mobility, your flexibility, and your strength in position. And so this is an easy thing that we can focus on as a PT because it's things that we can ideally change, right? And this is where we're addressing like flexibility, strength, mobility in certain positions. And um, technique is going to also determine where stress is placed. So stress isn't a bad thing. It is what it is, right? We know like if we think of physics, we know that people with long femurs tend to have a little bit more of like a forward torso in a squat versus people with shorter femurs, right? And so this plays a role in our positions as well. So I definitely think like technique position can play a role because if you're someone who, you know, for me, for example, I have long femurs and a short torso. So that's kind of like love to deadlift. I also have long arms too. So like love to deadlift.
Puller.
Yeah, love to pull, have a natural tendency for that. Squatting, I'm okay with it too, but like a backloaded squat is going to be more advantageous for me because I can use a little bit more of a hip dominant strategy. And
Bar, are you a low bar person because of
I
that?
love to low bar back squat.
Oh my God, don't cuss at me. I'm the opposite too though. I'm like a earthworm Jim. I'm all torso, no legs. I'm built for like wall balls and squats, but
Yeah.
low bar will fold me into a lawn chair and whatever. So
Yeah.
hard
And
pass.
so, which I think like there's a place for both, right? And I'm actually
100%.
high bar squatting right now intentionally because I can low bar
The
250,
house. Yeah.
but high bar, if I could hit 200, I'd be really happy. So, that's going to play a role. And if you're someone who doesn't understand that, every time you think you're back squatting, you're really hinging. And then when you do that repetitively over time, we can place stress in areas, that just get overdone. And for me, I like to look at it as like creating variability. I want to create more variability in movement, not necessarily limit or prevent another movement,
Love
right?
that.
So that's kind of something I focus on as a PT is creating variability and more strategies for movement and kind of helping expose people, right? And this is where that technique position aspect of injury can come into play. So that's definitely a big one. And I think the easiest thing that we can see, right? It's very easy to point out this is what it looks like when you do this, right? And then these next ones are a little bit more less obvious. To coaches, it can be a little more obvious, but like total volume and intensity, right? That's like
Mm.
most things that I see are training errors.
Hmm.
They're not a major thing. It can turn into a major thing, but they're not generally starting there. They probably have been feeling this for a little bit, right? And total volume and intensity is going to play a role. Um, and it's literally a game of numbers, right? And I use this to say that for people that are familiar with injury rates, specifically in CrossFit, there's been some papers studied that's gone out about CrossFit rates in CrossFit rates of injury.
Hmm.
And when research looks at injury rates in sport, they look at it by 1,000 hours trained. So they'll basically say like, for every 1,000 hours trained, this is your rate of injury. And when it comes to CrossFit, it's about 2.4. I have this written down. So 2.4 to 4.5 injuries per every 1,000 hours of participation. So first off, it's like in the top 25% in terms of like least dangerous compared to
Hmm.
other things like track and field, football. They're on the higher injury rate side, right? I shouldn't say dangerous, higher injury rates, because just because there's a higher injury rate does not mean it's
Less
dangerous,
risky. Yeah, yeah, less
right?
risky. Yeah.
Yeah. And so what this tells us is it's literally a numbers game. The more you train, the more your rate of injury increases. So if you're someone that trains 1 hour a week, 5 times a week, or 1 hour a day, 5 times a week, based on that 1,000 hours of injury rate, the risk of you getting injured is about one injury of every 1 to 2 years. That's only based on statistics, right?
That sounds so dangerous. That's not what Google told me about CrossFit.
Right.
Weird.
And so now, when we start to think of CrossFit Games athletes that are training 5, 6 hours a day, where obviously we can see how that can now turn out to be 5 to 6 fold, risk if other variables aren't considered, right? Because now you're just putting yourself in a position to be exposed to more stuff, not because it's more dangerous, but it's literally statistics, right? And so
You're racing a whole lot during the week.
yeah, exactly. And so that's really just about total volume and intensity. And, you know, I would say that that's one important thing. Then we're looking at like the next level, which is, more acute spikes in volume. And so this can be something like the Open comes out last year. How many people I saw with Achilles tendinopathy after 24.2? 600 plus double unders in an open workout, right? For people that haven't conditioned to do 600 double unders, or, maybe have never even done whatever, right? And so that is a really big spike in volume. So that's more of like an acute load management, right? And so things like the Open, things pop up, hero workouts, trends, right? So high rocks is becoming a big trend. And so we see seasonality can play a role. So as temperature changes in places, the people that don't have access to indoor treadmills, they're running more. So a spike in running volume, right? These are obvious things kind of to us as coaches, but from a perspective of like, some of them don't look as obvious, right?
So let me spin that into talking about just different things popping up and spikes. They're kind of changing the season. And like you and I, we've been around a long time, obviously same timeline kind of. I got in like 2012, 2011. And all you see at that time is like Rich Phelan rope climbs coming back to win. You don't know the kind of depth and breadth of all these things. Do you think the change in season, as far as going from like that old school 5 week open, big gap, regionals, big gap, games, very consistent, it was cool. And then we get to something like this year and the sanctional year. Is that like a cha-ching? Everybody's coming into the office, PT season, and then kind of like, is that where you see spikes and ebbs and flows too? Is kind of how the season changes.
It's hard to say because it's changed so much.
Amen.
I don't think it's been consistently long enough. And I personally haven't been I've been like, for as long as Matt's been working with his games athletes, I've been able to see the trends because I've worked with them in some capacity, right? And so things I'm starting to notice is not necessarily due to seasons changing, but noticing that, Dallin will get this little niggle around this time frame, right? Or James will get this thing as we increase this, right? And it's typically due to seasonality changes, like a big generally it's that transition from semifinals to the games
Hmm. Where
where
the volume really ramps up.
the volume starts to ramp up and they each kind of have their own thing that they, nothing that's been major, but just like the little thing that, sometimes this little thing acts up, right? And as we start, and it's, not to call them out, it's just what it happens, right?
No, they're my favorite reference because they're so competitively similar, but they are so end of the spectrum need wise as far as like the buckets they need to fill. Right, Dallin's been a big strong bear of a man since he was 18. James this past year has come into being a big strong bear of a man. They both kind of, James has been the aerobic monster. Dallin has come into that. So coming from both ends of the spectrum, that's my favorite reference.
Yeah. And so what I've noticed is now that I've known them for 4 or 5 years, we're starting to see trends that like around this time of year, this thing that starts to pop up, nothing that prevents them from competing, but like how can we avoid that now? Now it's been year 2, year 3 where we're starting to notice my elbow's feeling a little achy or my Achilles is acting up, and we're starting to say, oh yeah, like we're getting outside more, we're running more, or we're pulling more or whatever. And so like this, I love this stuff, right? As like a PT and someone who loves CrossFit, I like love just looking back at the season and be like, where can we prehab and put in things now that we know it's year 2 that this is happening around the same time, right? And that spike in volume can still happen even when you have the best coaches, the best intention, the best recovery, right? And we'll talk about those things too because those are important for everyone, but they can still happen, right? Because going back to that statistics, we know that the statistic is there for them to start feeling some stuff as they do more. So
Yeah, I love that. And when we get to those two guys are near and dear because I get tired of everybody talking shit on both of them. About James, fittest man on earth. You win, dog. Stuff happens.
yeah,
But knowing the things they both dealt with, especially last year, man, James has like weird hip knee things most years, which you probably know about. Dallins, I feel like are maybe a little more nitpicky, but you said something I love. And my buddy's a chiropractor and he's a big prehab guy. And it's kind of where like my knowledge base comes from, especially like in practice and affiliates, is harassing him to death. His name's Clayton Pitts, but the lead into things, do you think, and I call it like unseen hour stuff, right? Like, I mean, you've been in affiliates. I can't go home with you and make you mobilize. I can't make you stand up while you're at work, do all these things, XYZ, that keep you from getting crusty and wound up. Is that kind of the prescription you're giving these guys around those times? Is like, hey, on the front end, even if it's X amount of weeks out, like when does that clock start to kind of go injury prevention? Because like you said, we're playing the numbers game. It's not a if, it's a when. And if we can nail down when, how far out does that prehab stuff, with the residual things to where you're ready to run through the wall?
for sure. 8 weeks, I think, would be a great minimum, 8 to 12 weeks. And it's pretty simple. All I would be doing is some like heavy slow resistance. So like all we're doing is focusing on tendon health. So you're still doing your training, but 8 to 12 weeks prior to the ramp up in season, we're starting to do some elbow care that's like slow tempo with rotation, right? We're starting to do some really heavy slow tempo deficit calf raises, right? And we're just trying to target more the connective tissue. And so like that's a really easy thing to implement, 8 to 12 weeks before the season starts to ramp up. So maybe in that case it's right after the open or it's even right before the open, right? Depending on how the season goes for people. I think once the open goes, it starts to kind of hit the ground running. So, you know, for these athletes, like the open is nothing for them and the volume is nothing for them. So really maybe starting it right around the open time around, now would be fantastic to start getting people to do. And really what I start with is like, there's a research paper around heavy slow resistance starting at 3 sets of 15 at like an 8 out of 10 RPE, 3 seconds down, 3 seconds up tempo. It's going to blow you up, but it feels really good when you're done. And then basically week to week, you're decreasing the load to where your last 4 weeks is like a 4x8 and you're really in more of like a strength cycle. So it's a 12-week program, pretty easy to implement, 2 days a week. Typically it depends on the body region. So if someone's looking at like elbow, I think 2 days a week is fine because it's a smaller body region versus like Achilles that can handle a lot more load because that's going to play a role too. It's like going back to that stress, your elbows and your wrists aren't really built to handle the stress that CrossFit really does, but that doesn't mean you can't adapt. However, if you don't take the time to adapt, you're going to feel it, right? Versus
Mm-hmm.
like your hips, your knees, those are load bearing joints. They're meant to handle load and they can take on a little bit more. So, lower body maybe 3 times a week, upper body maybe twice a week is usually a good minimum effective dose.
Love that. Do you ever find yourself like comparing this to other sports? Like, 'cause I can't, me and Matt came out of football. He was a receiver. I was a fat receiver. I was a tight end. And so I remember my body feeling wrecked. And I know like slamming into people is a lot different than slamming barbells and back squatting really slow. Do you find any carryover as far as like either joint health or the other end of the spectrum, like it being harder on bodies in this versus where it's mostly, I used to joke and say it was a sport of the off season because, if you were a kind of a scumbag, not good athlete, but you were real good in the weight room, you could probably be okay at CrossFit, depending on the sport you were playing. But do you find any crossover, man? Because I still talk to kids that want to super specialize and all this. I tell them don't. People that are pulling their kids out of school to do CrossFit full time and all that, which I think is a far cry now. I don't think we're doing that anymore. But do you find any kind of crossover from like that single season kind of damage versus like the people now who, like you're saying, we're running this thing hot all the time? Like, is there kind of a correlation or is it kind of up
Yeah,
and down for either one?
it's hard to say. I think we know for a fact that it is a correlation in sports like, let's use baseball for example, because it's a really well researched in this specific thing in terms of specificity and like starting way too early as a young person.
And don't go overhead in an overhead sport. It's always been crazy to me.
Right. So it's a lot of things, right? So like throwing a baseball is like at 95 miles per hour is extremely aggressive on young kids are on people's arms, period, regardless of your age. Not to say that you can't or shouldn't do it, but it should certainly be monitored. And kids that are allowed to do it year long because they think that's what's going to get them to be a professional sport athlete, is there's evidence that actually shows that kids that specialize younger fail to make high level because they get burnt out, because they get injured. So I don't know that there's enough evidence to say that happens with CrossFit, but I think we're starting to see from the the younger athletes that are super talented dropping out due to burnout and due to, physical and mental well-being, concerns, that it becomes a lot. So I think that I don't know that we have the evidence, but I think we definitely, from the research perspective, because it's a young sport, but we know for a fact in other sports that it happens. And we also know from other sports that the more sports that an athlete plays, the better that they are as an athlete, the better that they are as in their overall well-being in terms of their musculoskeletal health. And then I think we see that transition into the games, right? Like you can be really good at CrossFit, but the games and like these outside of CrossFit events are really showing your athleticism. When we see things like, you know, track and field and biking and all these like things that like kids do, right? Like
Yeah.
kids like playing.
Exposure. Yeah.
Yeah. And so when you're taking away the ability to play sport or just doing CrossFit, it's going to take you to a certain place, but it's going to show like at the games is where we really see the true athleticism come out, right?
Facts.
Yeah.
Do you think? And so this is like a funny thing to look at now. I used to be like CrossFit football sicko, love John Wellborn and all those things. All the recent stuff's kind of weird. He made a comment the other day talking about CrossFit athletes aren't real athletes, and my joke has always been if you want to see if they're athletic, throw them on a speed ladder just for jokes. Me and Matt have made that joke. But what he was talking about was we're all sagittal plane forward. Do you think? And I know program is different now. Like, and that's really kind of what you were talking about, like the 8 weeks out. Like, hey, we're going tendon strength, joint stability, health, because we're about to run the race really fast. That's like a programming issue and being in tune with your coach and people like you. In that way, from super specializing your kids, pulling them out of things, and burnout. So, maybe they're constantly varied sports throughout the year. Weird, but getting in different planes of motion and stuff. Do you think that's kind of an issue with us? Because I think that's what he was kind of getting at is, I come out of football. He was a lineman. I got to play patty cake a little bit. So I kind of get where he was coming from. And I just also love hearing these people argue about it. But we don't do many different planes. Like if you implement rotational things in your affiliate, you will see people's heads explode. And the time that I realized that was at this time it was the CrossFit Sports Specific cert. It used to be CrossFit Football. I think John had gotten out. Tex McQuinlan did it, who is CSCS. He travels the entire country, I want to say world, doing strength conditioning talks. Like super genius guy, but can explain it very simply, as most people that have a deep knowledge base can. But that's what we talked about, and he exposed everybody, right? And you could tell like who had just gotten into sports or in CrossFit and later in life, but there was no kind of rotation or coordination or anything like that. Do you think people pay taxes on that in our sport? Because rarely, up until I'd say the last, since maybe 2017, 18, but maybe later, did people start caring about branching out away from just being in that hallway, like John was saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I think there's some benefit to it for sure. Again, it's about going back to that variability component. It's like if you only train in one plane, you're not exposing yourself to other things. And I think understanding that that's important. Rotation is important when we're looking at specifically the shoulder and the hip. It's going to be extremely important. And, you know, frontal plane movement. I think we're starting to see more things like Cossack squats are a very simple thing that you can implement that can be super effective, and you can really expose someone with a Cossack squat, especially if they don't like loading into one side. So it can be really simple. I think it's definitely I implement it for sure. Like, you
Every
know,
day,
as my
every day.
as a rehab professional, yeah, that's stuff that we look at. It's an easy low hanging fruit that like you can look at. Even some things as like side planks, right? Side planks, adductor planks, right? Again, frontal plane stability can be super easy and effective. So yeah, I think from an affiliate perspective, a lot of it is time based. You only have so much time, and like most people like to go get crushed to not do accessory work.
Yeah, I've been
So
campaigning to make accessories sexy again for a long time.
yeah. And I think like, we're in this space where you've been in CrossFit long enough, you ride the roller coaster of like, I'm obsessed with this thing. I want to compete. I want to compete. I get injured, but it's okay because I still want to compete, right? And then you get to a
Mm-hmm.
point where you're just like, all right, I love this, and how can I do this for as long as I can? And then that's when we start to explore, different avenues of health and maybe getting out of planes and all that stuff. So I think part of it is just like someone's timeline of CrossFit, like where they're at in their journey of CrossFit, because you kind of get addicted to like, I need to sweat or else I didn't get a good workout, right? So
I need to hurt. I need to
there's a
bake
lot
and
of
sizzle.
components in that, right? And like that's honestly is on my list here, the last thing, but I think probably one of the thing that's overlooked the most is this psychological and sociological component of injury. And that's, that's where things like ego can come in, athlete brain and athlete identity to sport, body image and history with weight loss or weight gain. So someone who lost 100 pounds and now they're fearful that they're going to gain that weight back. So there's a lot of this like psychological, sociological wrap around with injuries that I think sometimes get missed because either it's a little uncomfortable to talk about. For me as a healthcare professional, I think it's a little bit more normalized, but like I ask questions in my intake like, if you can't exercise, how do you manage stress? And I can't tell you 50% of the time it's I can't, right? And so that right there is that's now we're maybe working with a mental health professional or something like that, not necessarily in my scope of practice. But if you're not asking your athletes that, you're missing a big component of their mindset, you know, the reason why they're injured or dealing with chronic injuries, how they manage stress in life outside of exercise is super important. And then like, that's a really easy question I think you can ask, but then even things like what's what's your sleep like, what's your stress like in general, what's your nutrition like. At the end of the week I put in like an athlete check-in that asks all those questions, and then also looking for wins. So like what were some of your wins inside and outside of the gym. And when an athlete, especially a professional athlete, gets injured, there's a lot going on there, right? Like it's not just their injury, it's their motivation, their self-image, their self-worth, all these things. So it can be obviously for a professional athlete a little bit different because it affects potentially their lifestyle, their money. But
Mm-hmm.
then from a person who maybe is like raising a family and whatnot, that can affect them from, a different perspective as well. Like that's their only me time is the gym, and now I can't go to the gym anymore or whatever. So this is just like I think a component of injury that's super important to understand and feel comfortable asking your athletes these kinds of questions.
No, yeah, and I call those like the unseen hour check-ins, and talking about like not being able to go home with them and all that stuff. And I found, especially as weird you say that in the last like 3 months, maybe the asking for the wins thing, when especially when you realize it's somebody that can't kind of disassociate like their identity from this thing, because you think, oh, if I can't do that, what good am I? Right. And so getting them to celebrate things that like maybe they overlooked or maybe they didn't give themselves enough credit for has been super powerful for me.
Yeah, and I think also just knowing one thing, and this can go for someone like me, a physical therapist, it can go for coaches, is like know where your limitations are, right? Like as coaches, you can definitely be the front line for musculoskeletal injuries, but like your knee givings with someone with knee pain can have 20 things going on. Just because you're giving them knee extensions because so and so on Instagram told you that's the best thing to do, or you're doing knees over toes or whatever, like I'm sorry. You can try it in the beginning, sure. And but like once your athlete is not getting better for 2 to 4 weeks, you need to refer out, right? In the same capacity, when it comes to we can talk to people about this all day long and they can look at us in the face and look like they agree, but at some point it's not our scope of practice, right? We need to be comfortable saying, "Hey, have you ever worked with a mental health provider?" We work with a some I'm just using this example. Like there's lots of people out there now that I know Matt's gym, Tailwinds has some mental health providers there that do CrossFit. So there's people that understand and like, hey, we work with these people. They're really great. They do CrossFit. They get it. Would you be open to having a conversation? Because I feel like this is something that maybe is limiting your progress and it's outside of my scope, right? And so being comfortable having those conversations as a coach when it comes to injuries or nutrition or same, I understand nutrition. I work with a coach personally,
Hmm.
and I can definitely tell when people are underfueled, and I have those conversations, but then I refer out, right? So it's really looking at it from like the best of the best know when where their limitation is, and they don't try to be everything for everyone. They say like, I'm the best at this, and then I'm going to send you the person who's the best at this and this.
Oh yeah, I think understanding that you don't have to have all the answers is very cool as a coach, and that was always kind of my struggle with not go ascending to like L17 coach and all that stuff. Is I felt like the follow through, and this was a very immature view. I felt like the follow through was very kind of It just lacked. It's like, hey, pay your $1,000, go forth. And I went and re-upped my L. I went and re-upped my L1 live. So did it, went in person, redid the whole thing. And the guy put it probably the best I'd ever heard. He's an English cat, Steve something. He's I only know I only remember most of it because we talked about jiu-jitsu for like 2 hours. But he said, look, this is not the end all be all. If you take this and this is the last education you pursue, you will make all of us look stupid. And you will be part of the shitty Google reviews that CrossFit gets. And I was like, this was a good weekend because you're just not used to that. Right. And so I think it's nuanced to look at, and I see it now, even like the affiliate I'm at, they purchase affiliate programmer from a company. They have accessories in there. And I think the more people are educated and they pursue like contact with people like you to get poured into, and they have the maturity to be like, hey, I don't have all the answers, but Nicole knows these things. Like 5 minutes a leg for a couch stretch isn't going to fix all the things that go from your ankle to your hip. That's all I got. Good luck. Right. And you said 2 to 4 weeks. Boy, look, I got 5 days with you for me to try to fix it. And if I can't get any kind of change or improvement, I'm shipping you out. And I'll cut you off like a drunk at the bar. But I think that's a huge thing for like not athletic maturity. I say that a lot for coach maturity is that realizing like your scope is your scope. The knowledge I have is what it is, and that thing has an end. And that's when it comes to people that like like you have restarted their life to go pursue a deeper depth of knowledge, or chiropractors, whoever that is. I get way less witchcraft pushback on PTs than I do chiropractors. So I don't know if that's a feud y'all have in camps, but yeah, I think it's a tough maturity thing, man, with coaches.
For sure. And I think like, you know, I think it comes two ways, right? Maturity is definitely one, but then also when you start to get to your end, right? Like when it's either taking up too much of your time or like you don't have enough time to give it appropriate amount of attention that it needs, then like hopefully it doesn't get to that point. But sometimes that's when I end up, it really ends up being like I get in contact, which is fine because it happens either way. But I think like understanding, that's really an important aspect. And I do it all the time. I try to have a person for all the things that it can't be me. And I work with elite CrossFit athletes and I program for them, but I'm not going to pretend like I'm the reason why their programming is getting to the games, right? Like I'm a strength conditioning coach, and I generally, like, my rule is I get you to 80% back to where you're at in terms of strength numbers and stuff, 100% from the injury perspective. And then we transition that into your performance coach, right? And luckily for me, that's Matt, and I have a direct connection to him. But for other people, even from that performance aspect, like, you know, if someone goes to the games because I program for them, it's not because of me. It's because they were already genetically blessed, right? And
I'm not.
we see that a lot in CrossFit. A lot of the times before people get into professional coaching, they started with a coach in their gym or whatever. And that's how they get there, right? And then at some point they realize I need someone who's a little bit more specific for the things that I need. And so I think just remembering, knowing the thing you're really good at, and then just being confident, because at the end of the day, it's for your client, and that's the first person that needs to be, thought of, not your ego or your personality or whatever.
No, 100%. I think that's part of the service. And speaking of like performance, we're in the Open, 25.1 last week. Brother sister rivalry. Who won?
I won.
How bad? How bad did you win?
Not by 6 reps.
Oh, that's a lot. That's a lot. Wait, in what round?
6, the 24s.
6 clean and jerks or 6 burpees?
I 6 clean and jerks. So I did.
Oh yeah.
Clean and jerks. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a good 20-second lead. Take that, Matthew. Matthew Dan, how dare you?
He will get me at a high school gymnastics. So it'll probably be, 1-to-1, and then we'll see what happens on the last. His physique will take over on the gymnastics.
Wait, cause y'all like the same height? You a little shorter than him?
Well, I'm 5'4". He's like 6'1".
Just kidding. That's right. Touche. Just kidding. I don't know why I forgot you're not tall. Yeah, that's what I keep telling people. I wasn't even going to do it this year, like, because the wrist weird nervy thing, I still don't know what it is. It's like deteriorating. It feels like there's a guitar string for my thumb right here now. But, I'll go see somebody. It's only been 2 to 4, 6 months. I'm right inside your window. But a guy just texted me. He was like, remember when you told me you'd never beat me in an open workout? I was like, remember when I was competing and cared, and I'm retired now? I got to get these Friday Night Lights points now. Yeah. So I did all the burpees with like one fist, as you do. That's the hard part for me, dude. I hate any kind of injury that takes me out from being able to demo. And that's like still the weird immature part of my brain is I feel like if I can't demo, I'm not coaching worth a shit, right? But Bill Belichick never threw a football. So
yeah. I will say that when I started doing CrossFit when I started coaching CrossFit in like 2014, I couldn't do a pull-up or a ring muscle up or a bar muscle up or, a strict pull-up. Probably not even a kipping pull-up. Who knows? But like, yeah, I think you don't have to necessarily be the best athlete to be a great coach. In fact, most of the best athletes are not great coaches.
Amen.
So for sure, that does not have to be the case. And similar to you, I actually very much enjoyed this open workout, which tells me I may have sandbagged it a little bit, but not intentionally. Just like I was just going based on feeling good. Like I was like, I want to feel good and I'm going to push at the end. And that's what I did. So
did you know Matt's score ahead of time?
I did.
Oh, okay. The truth comes out.
I did. However, he's also known mine in the past too. I did, but I will tell you, not until the last round did I never intentionally paced to beat him. I didn't look at paces. I went on my own, but I knew that I was going to beat him based on where I was in the last round. And then I asked my husband in the middle of the workout, I was like, how many burpees did Matt get? And he said, he goes 14. And then it was like a 10-second pause. And he goes, no, 14 clean and jerks. And I was like, okay, I already knew I was going to beat him at that point. But yeah, so it pushed it a little bit. So honestly, had I paced, I probably would have beat a little more, but it's okay.
You know what messed me up is I looked up in like the round of 12 or 15 and it was only at like 5 minutes. I was like, oh no.
So here's what I did. And I think this really helped. This is the first time I did this. I ran a 10-mile race, 10-mile trail race like a couple weeks ago. And I created a playlist for it. And I knew the open workout was 15 minutes. So I put intentionally 5 songs. So I knew, I never looked at the clock. I knew based on the song where I was. And it gave me the mindset of knowing exactly where I was. So I don't know if that helped, but
you knew when you Pavloved yourself into when that Lizzo song came on, you knew you had 5 minutes left.
So it's actually Destiny's Child, Survivor. That's my.
Oh, we're old. I mean, my bad.
That's my last song push. And yes, so.
Cut it on for Survivor. That's hilarious. All right, you got 10 minutes for your call. So my kind of with you guys, people that are into rehab, prehab, and all things kind of athlete care, give me like your favorite, and it doesn't have to be a CrossFit athlete, but like your kind of favorite success story. Maybe it was like something that was a weird struggle, like that you had to go kind of learn something through. But somebody, I mean, we talked about Rebecca's ACL, stuff like that, but what's kind of been like I know this is like picking a favorite child, but I'm going to make you do it. Like your favorite kind of success story from like something that may have looked bleak, but got them back in time and they flourished and all this stuff, whatever that might look like.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's necessarily like one athlete. I think my perspective. So first off, I'm like a continuous, like obsessive learner. So my style of practice is a conglomeration of so many people that influenced me. Um, and I really try to gain from everything. The first thing when I started, treating CrossFit athletes is realizing how much you can take from so many places. Like if someone has a back injury in CrossFit, it can affect their running, their gymnastics, their weightlifting, and then also their life. So I think like back injuries is probably one of my favorite things to work on because it can be so debilitating in terms of like affecting your life in so many capacities. And I've learned from in my opinion, the best of the best of like the running community. So I'll shout out some people, but Chris Johnson is a running PT. So that's amazing. From the gymnastics community, so obviously Dave Durante is amazing, but from the rehab perspective, Dave Tilley, who also has relationships with Dave Durante, is a physical therapist that specializes in working in gymnastics. Taken a ton of education from them in terms of weightlifting and sports like that. Dan Pope, he has affiliation too with like Power Monkey and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing in terms of like understanding how to work with barbell athletes. I mean, these are all people that I learned from while I was still in PT school, which I think allowed me to set myself up for, doing things the way that I do now. And of course, I'm still learning. So those are kind of some of my big ones. But then like a big thing that I'm working on right now too is, and this is probably going into ACL and working with Rebecca, is like really, really understanding plyometrics better. And even as myself, starting to train plyometrics and being able to differentiate that box jumps for conditioning is not plyometric training. And so really understanding what that looks like, because true plyometric training is short duration and long duration contact times with a specific number of contacts, right? Not box jumps in a conditioning workout. And so that's probably right now what I'm like really focusing on in terms of education for myself and honing that in. So that maybe is a good example, like getting challenged from not just Rebecca. We work with tons of ACL athletes in person as well. But if I feel like I am not up to par in something, I am going to purchase a workshop, purchase and continuing education, get a mentor or whatever. I'm very much on mentorship and like, I pay for a business mentor. I have a life coach that I work with. I have a nutrition coach that I work with. So when I say like referring out in business, I also refer out in life, right?
So many write-offs. So many write-offs.
So like, I don't know if that answered your question, but
No, I did for sure. So it's kind of bigger, lower extremities is what it sounds like. It's like challenging you to kind of expand. And I'll tell you, it wasn't even like an injury thing. It was me. I guess it was my wrist. So like I've been out of the game for doing the things I love. Like I didn't realize how much I love Olympic lifting and feeling explosive. And so kind of exploring those things. And Blaine McConnell is not a PT. He's just a strength guy. You've probably seen him, probably the most explosive ball-headed man I've ever seen in my life. He's a USA bobsled guy, but floated around CrossFit for a while. I know him through Christian Harris, but has a lot of plyo stuff. And so I get on like force absorption and stuff like that, like depth jumps and prepping for things like that and tissue prep. And then how it translates into like me building warm-ups for people to get CNS prep and us sequencing right and the turnover for all those other things. And so I've seen dividends similarly, like program for people to get somebody who like maybe they don't feel so powerful with the barbell in the hand, but if I can get you to feel that in another arena, and that's kind of been the one that I've been diving into. So yeah, no, that answers it. Especially like coming off ACLs, those are the things that scare me as a coach when I'm not a PT is you have people approach you and they want you to do it with you because of the relationship you have, but like your depth of knowledge is so you're not a PT. limited to, your scope of practice. And so those have kind of been like the things that have forced me into growing and getting in contact with people like Clayton and you and stuff like that. So
Yeah.
no, that answers it, man.
Rate of force development too is another thing that we're working on a lot too. And because specifically with ACL injuries and lower extremity injuries, rate of force development is a big one. And additionally, just in terms of like most people's ACL rehab is not good. That is a
It's
industry,
cookie cutter. I feel like a lot of them are cookie cutter.
industry kind of, it's a poor industry thing, right? That is a us as a physical therapy profession and other people that are involved as well issue. And so that's something that we really, really try. We're very stringent on our return to sport parameters because we don't want to hand them off to a strength coach and they still are looking like trash when they squat or can't jump or can't run, right? And so that's why, you know, working, we give this type of attention to all of our athletes. But obviously, when you're looking at someone who's a professional athlete, like I get very invested and, it takes up a lot of my time and energy because it's important to me. Right. And like, I want Rebecca to succeed and I want her to go and crush it when she gets back into competition. And like, so it pushes me more from that perspective of like, because I care, right? I care. It's also my brother's athlete. He cares. And so like, it's probably a little unhealthy at times the way it affects me, but I think that at the end of the day it benefits the athlete because we care that much. But so I think like when we work with someone that their livelihood is at stake, it pushes us to make sure that we're on our shit a little bit more, right? And
No,
so
for sure.
yeah, I think when it comes to ACLs, that's a whole other topic, but like anytime you're getting someone coming off a surgery, like especially a reconstruction of a limb, whether that is an elbow or a shoulder or a knee, like I would really look at and say like, how complete was your rehab? Because most of the time it's not from a high level perspective, right? From an athlete perspective.
Mm-hmm.
And
It was
so
good for old lady knees, not for jumping, bending, running, cutting knees.
exactly. Yeah. So
No, I think, and this is like always my thing. I wouldn't care if like somebody's a garbage man if they can tell me how much they love it and it's this passionate thing. I'll sit and listen to you like it's story time at the daycare, right? And so and I'm like a crier and I'm like an empath with the people and the affiliates. I think that's probably the only reason I've stayed in it for so long is because it kind of fills that bucket for me to get to love on people. And if you find something to where like it fills all the buckets, like athlete Nicole dealing with athletes, and then you get all these things, man. Like you can't even. It means you chose right. So that's awesome. Yeah, that answers the question even more so. But you got a call in 3 minutes. So Matthew Dan, sorry for the ass whooping in 25.1. You get another shot, another 2 shots. But man, thanks for coming and unpacking all that stuff. Where can folks find you on the Instagrams or locally or?
yeah, so I'm in Naples, Florida. So if you're in Naples, Florida, or Southwest Florida, from Cape Coral, probably that's a little bit of a drive, but down to Marco Island. And then on Instagram, I think it's NT underscore the CrossFit DPT.
I think it is too because I had to look it up in a bunch of
I'm sure you
videos.
can probably put it in the show notes. And then my business is the Resilient Athlete PT. But yeah, I don't have that many followers, so I answer DMs all the time.
Damn right. It's NT underscore the CrossFit DPT, correct?
Yeah. So yeah. And then, our website's theresilientathletept.com if you want to hit us up if you're in town. I know I'll be up in Jacksonville in a couple of weeks hanging out with them up there. So
With all the beefcakes. Hell yeah, brother.
yeah.
Yeah, so you guys holler at Nicole. She does telehealth stuff and consults and all those things. So I'll put the Instagram handle and that'll take you to all her links and stuff, man. But thanks for kicking it, bud.
Yeah. Thank you.
See y'all next time. Yeah.